Going on, everyone? JohnMatrix here. So today we got another Warhammer 40k video for you guys. I saw this video show up on my YouTube feed. It's from Arbitor Ian. It's about the various guns in Warhammer, what they do and how they tell them apart. And it kind of made me realize, as I saw the thumbnail for it, that I really don't know all the various kinds of weapons that are used by the various, forces of the Imperium, etc. I basically know that, there's bolters, bolt guns, heavy bolters, Lasguns of various types, flamers. That's really kind of about it. I really don't know, like, the actual guns. I know there's, chain swords and power swords and other melee weapons, but as far as actual guns go, I don't really know all the various guns, how many different varieties they are, what they do, etc. So I figured we'd check out this video and see if Arbitor Ian will elaborate more on the various, types of guns and what they do, according to the title of this video. So we're going to check out this video. Again, this is by Arbitor Ian, Warhammer guns, what they do, and how to tell them apart. I will have a link to this video and to Arbitor Ian's channel down below in the description, so you can go down there and check out his stuff. And yeah, I guess just get on in it here. So boop. Volume is good. Bada boom, bada bing.
Hi gang, so the Imperium in Warhammer 40,000 uses a huge range of different weapons technologies, ranging from things we might recognize from the present day to crazy science guns.
Plasma guns.
When you're assembling your first model kits, or just trying to recognize things from the lore, it can be pretty difficult to know which is which. So in this video, I'm going to run through all the most common weapons in 40k's Imperium, explain how they're meant to work, what they do, and how you can recognize them on your models so that you can tell your heat rays from your laser beams.
Cool. Cool.
So, in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there are loads of different guns. 30,000 years of slow technological development has left the Imperium with a range of different...
You would think, between now and, 30,000 some odd years from now, technology would advance a little bit, and we'd have some pretty crazy stuff. I'm interested to know, actually, more about what the dark age of technology, the peak of human technology, what those weapons were like, because from what I've heard so far, weapons that can open up singularities, or bullets where if they miss their target they'll travel through a singularity and open up another portal to actually hit their target, from a different angle or direction, trajectory, whatever, so there's a lot of stuff that sounds pretty crazy, and what they're currently using in the present isn't anywhere near as advanced as what humanity has had. So I would be interested to hear more about that stuff as well. But yeah, let's continue on here.
Different weapons, from simple slug throwers to radiation guns.
And yeah, I know that, again, there's a wide range of planets that have a wide range of technology. Some are still like feudal, medieval times, kind of levels of technology, and have soldiers, armed forces that represent those times. And then they also have, stuff that would be considered modern day technology, assault rifle, shotguns, sniper rifles, etc. And then there's, the more advanced sci-fi futuristic stuff. I'd be curious to know more about what the Adeptus Mechanicus, the guys that actually make all the weapons and develop certain technologies, if they have more advanced stuff, what their stuff looks like compared to the Imperium, etc., etc. So hopefully we get to see, some of that in this.
Range of different weapons, from simple slug throwers to radiation guns, and they all work differently and, importantly, look different. If you've just got into Warhammer 40k, then you're probably aware that it's kind of important which teeny tiny weapons your teeny tiny soldiers are carrying, especially for your opponent, so that they know who they should shoot first. Thankfully, The horrible factions of the nightmare future have been pretty considerate when designing their weapons, and there are some key design features on all their technologies that allow us, the players, to easily tell them apart on the battlefield.
Bolt rifle, assault
in this
bolters.
video, I'm going to go through all the main types of weapon you're going to encounter, at least the imperial ones, since that does cover most of the factions, explain what they are and how they work, what they're
And
used
they have
for
shotguns
in the
in the far
game,
future,
and how
so.
you can easily tell them apart. Oh, and also, I'm not American. I don't know anything about guns, but don't worry about that. In the grim dark...
I like how he has to preface it by saying he's not American to know anything about guns. I find that funny.
...darkness of the far future, weapon design doesn't exactly make sense anyway.
Yeah.
We'll be fine.
That is something. Some of the weapons seem like they would be bulky and cumbersome and not really necessarily efficient, but I guess at the same time, you know, if you're in Astartes, you could probably handle just about whatever, you know what I mean?
Let's start with the most famous of imperial weapons, the bolter. Bolt weapons are an ancient Terran design used mostly by the elite forces of the Imperium, the Space Marines, Sisters of Battle, and Adeptus Custodes. Rather than bullets, the bolts they fire are more like tiny self-propelled missiles with their own propellant that ignites when the bolt leaves the barrel. These bolts have an armor-piercing tip, but an explosive core designed to explode within the target, causing...
So it's literally like a rocket. It's an RPG that has been turned into a machine gun, and the actual explosive has been made into, you know, bullet-sized, whatever. Interesting. So it's literally rocket-propelled bullets. Interesting. Okay. I mean, obviously it would be effective if they could, you know, do it right. I would assume that kind of technology is something we could do nowadays. I just don't know if producing it on like a mass scale would be really efficient, considering bullets work just fine as they are now. You know what I mean? I guess these would be more in modern day, would be used more as like an anti-vehicle kind of situation. And maybe they even have bullets like that. Maybe there's like 50 cal rounds that actually kind of do something like this, where they'll pierce the outer armor and then explode a certain way in. You know, I don't know. So interesting.
But an explosive core designed to explode within the target.
Oh, and they even have different kinds. There's a standard bolt, there's an inferno bolt, deuterium core replaced with phosphorus gel, hellfire round core tip replaced with mutagenic acid vial. Nice. Metal storm frag shell, mass reactive cap replaced by proximity detector, detonation tip, and deuterium core replaced with increased charged and fragmentation casting. Okay, so it's just a frag round that will just let it explode, and the various fragmentation pieces will just, you know, go out and hit everything in there in the radius. Stalker silent shell propellant based on main charge replaced by gas cartridge. Detonator cap replaced by solidified mercury slug. Sounds like a shotgun kind of thing. Crack pad and penetrator round. Deuterium core replaced by solid adamantine core and heavier main charge. So this is like heavy duty. It's replaced by adamantine, so it probably goes through just about anything, huh? Interesting.
Causing horrific damage, and that's considered a feature. Bolt guns are terror weapons, high tech but deliberately brutal. Designed.
That's kind of what like most of the weapons are, right? Most of the weapons are really kind of terrifying, psychological, you know, weapons as well. Because you look at the chainsword. The chainsword, you know, wouldn't be considered. I mean, again, in the hands of an Astartes with that much strength and power being able to put behind it, you'd be able to cut through anything. And with the futuristic technology they have of making these, you know, mono steel weapons that are able to cut, you know, something at a molecular level. Sometimes English is hard, you know. Obviously, it'd be better than anything we have nowadays, but with our current technology, a chainsword would be pretty much useless compared to a regular sword. Other than just the sight of someone just getting, you know, basically a chainsaw cut through them and having the gore spray everywhere. You know, that's kind of just what, in general, most of the weapons in the 40k universe seem that the Imperium use are not only weapons to actually kill the target, but to psychologically break the target and spread terror and fear.
Are terror weapons, high tech but deliberately brutal, designed during the Great Crusade for use by the Space Marine legions, superhuman warriors whose effect was as much psychological as anything else. They're noisy and short-ranged and cause visible overkill, perfect for shock troops like the Astartes.
Right.
And because of that association with the Space Marines, within the Imperium, they're considered a holy weapon, a symbol of the Imperium's strength. There are downsides, though. Bolt gun ammo is relatively expensive to supply, and the guns themselves need a good deal of maintenance. All things that are fine when the army has the infrastructure and training to support that, but outside these elite military forces, bolters can be somewhat rarer. In the other Imperial militaries, bolt guns and bolt pistols are considered prestige weapons, sidearms for inspiring officers or commissars, and outside the military, they're the sort of guns gang leaders would carry. Impressive, expensive, and intimidating weapons. So
they're kind of like status symbols on top of being, you know, these weapons of terror that are kind of the main weapon for the Space Marines. They're also kind of status symbols amongst other parts of society with, you know, commissars and gang leaders and stuff like that. Interesting. I mean, you could see why.
Would carry impressive, expensive, and
that would, like, imagine you go to reload this and you forget the spikes there and you're just like, ah, you know what I'm saying? Like you're trying to pack the mag in and you stab yourself. Oops.
Of guns gang leaders would carry impressive, expensive, and intimidating weapons. Like all the guns we're going to look at, the basic bolter technology has been adapted into a number of different formats. The standard bolt gun and bolt rifle used by the Marines and the sororitas have been developed into a number of marks over the years, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, many scaled down for use by regular humans. Bolters are often added to other weapons to form a combi weapon, or doubled up to form rapid-firing storm bolters and combi bolters. The heavy weapon version, the heavy bolter, is frequently found mounted on Imperial vehicles or on support carriages in Astra Militarum heavy weapon teams, both of which make its great weight much more manageable. And there are also even more esoteric and technically advanced versions of the technology, like the Lastrum bolt weapons used by the Custodes and the Mauler bolt cannons found on Mechanicum robots. In most games, bolt guns are depicted as a rapid-firing basic infantry weapon with a higher strength than most comparable guns. They're ridiculously effective against low toughness, low armor infantry, and have a good chance of hurting the bigger and scarier creatures of the 41st millennium. Heavy bolters are much the same, guns with a high rate of fire that are good against heavy infantry and even some lighter vehicles. How scary they actually...
So it's kind of like assault rifle version is the regular bolter, and the heavy bolter would be, you know, the machine gun version in the 40k universe, essentially. Makes sense.
Are good against heavy infantry and even some lighter vehicles. How scary they actually are depends on the game you're playing. In large war games like 40k, bolt weapons are just pretty strong, rapid-firing anti-infantry weapons. In games like Imperium Maledictum or Necromunda, set far away from the battlefield where the biggest threat is an enemy ganger, a bolt gun is a terrifying weapon, though very hard to maintain and prone to jamming or running out of ammo. As you probably guessed from all these images so far, bolt weapons are pretty visually distinctive. They're easy to recognize by their boxy shape, they're all chunky rectangles, and they've got very little visible barrel. They've just got this muzzle poking out the end, really wide and with a large hole drilled through it. These features are common across all bolt weapons. Once you know what to look for, it's easy to recognize them.
They seem like they'd be very cumbersome to use, honestly, and I don't know, like... Obviously, this is technology that's in the future, it's sci-fi, but practically, you know, they would seem like they wouldn't necessarily be the best and most accurate weapons compared to, like, assault rifles that we have nowadays. But again, who knows what other kind of technology is added to it to decrease recoil and muzzle climb and, you know, vertical sway and all that kind of stuff. So you know, who knows? They might actually be in the hands, again, it's also in the hands of an Astartes or something like that, who's far stronger than the average human. You know, they would probably have a lot better recoil control and grouping with their guns than what the average human would have. So it might not be necessarily a problem.
Are common across all bolt weapons. Once you know what to look for, it's easy to recognize them. Next up, if bolters are the prestige weapon of the Imperium, then the most ubiquitous is the humble Lasgun, the most common weapon technology in the Imperium. Lasguns are laser guns. They fire an explosive blast from a rechargeable power pack. It's unclear exactly what they fire. In some media, lasguns fire a tiny beam from point to point, but in most cases, it's like a laser bolt that travels like a bullet and causes surface damage from heat, famously cauterizing the wounds as it causes them. When they fire, lasguns make a distinctive whip-like cracking sound. In the Imperium, these are a proven military technology. They have more than enough stopping power to put down an unarmored human, which is mostly what Imperial Defense Forces fight. They're robust, reliable, and easy to resupply. And given the lack of recoil, they require little training to use. So, as well as being the default weapon of the Astra Militarum, they're also a very common weapon amongst settlers, travelers, underhive dwellers, and private security forces.
Makes sense.
Just like with bolt technology, las weapons come in a massive variety of different shapes and sizes. On the smaller end of the scale, las pistols, las guns, and las rifles are all various sorts of basic anti-infantry weapon used against low armored infantry, but maybe a little underpowered against anything bigger. But las technology is pretty versatile. Hot shot las guns, hell guns, and long las sniper rifles all use variations on a massively overcharged power pack to punch through enemy armor. On the much heavier end of the scale, las cannon and laser destroyers have much bigger capacitors and are primarily designed for punching through enemy tank armor. A las cannon is one of the most common anti-tank weapons in the Imperium's arsenal. These uses remain.
So it sounds like, you know, a lasgun's power is based essentially on how much juice you can just throw through the gun, right? I would is that accurate? I don't know. I don't know if it's a situation where you could take like a standard lasgun and have some kind of like power pack that you're wearing and attach it to it, and it would be able to throw the projectile that it shoots, the bolt, the las bolt, whatever, at a higher velocity, higher rate, and increase its power, accuracy, whatever. Because that's kind of what it sounds like, from what he's talking about here. Yeah. Interesting. And they sound like they're kind of like the lasguns are more of the standard issue, mass-produced weapons and are what basically civilians would have access to on a regular basis, the various types, because he's talking about settlers and whatnot having them. And I would assume they're probably also like, the civilian hunting rifle kind of a situation in the 40k universe. So, interesting.
A las cannon is one of the most common anti-tank weapons in the Imperium's arsenal. These uses remain pretty consistent across all the different 40k games. Las guns are light but relatively low-powered, rapid-firing weapons, whereas las cannons are single-shot anti-tank.
That's interesting. It's like a las Gatling gun.
Relatively low-powered, rapid-firing weapons, whereas las cannons are single-shot anti-tank weapons. But in games where it matters, las weapons are also about the most reliable weapons you can get. They don't jam, and it's hard to ever run out of ammo. Famously, in World, power packs can be recharged just by throwing them in a fire for a while.
Really?
Like with many Imperial weapons, las weapons can be...
Interesting. So I wonder what the power packs essentially would be made of then, because if it's like... If they recharge by heat... or from like, just thermally charged somehow, would that also mean essentially if they're just left out in the sun long enough, it would probably take days, but they're left out in the sun long enough, depending on, I guess, the world they lived on and the environmental conditions, that they could just recharge that way too. I mean, between what he's talking about with the lasgun and the bolters, you're essentially giving up raw power of the bolters for the reliability of the lasguns is what it sounds like. It sounds like the lasguns are something that are relatively versatile, that basically anyone can use the power packs sound like they might be almost kind of like a universal thing, that a power pack could go in between the various types of lasguns. You know, they don't, like, each lasgun doesn't need a different kind of power pack. Like, you have guns nowadays, you can't put a 45, you know, round into a 9mm gun. It doesn't work that way. But you could take, you know, a power pack from a las rifle and put it into a las pistol, or vice versa. That's kind of what it sounds like from what he's talking about. So you have a lot of universal compatibility and versatility, along with reliability, but you don't have just the raw power that the bolt gun has, essentially, is what it sounds like between the two of them.
Just by throwing them in a fire for a while. Like with many Imperial weapons, las weapons can be recognized by their muzzle. Las guns come in a massive variety of styles, but generally they have long visible barrels and a distinctive diagonal cutaway on the muzzle, sometimes with a sight on top. The larger laser destructors and las cannons might also have coils around the base of the barrel to focus all that energy, but it's the diagonal line that really tells you it's a las weapon. Okay, we've got space laser guns and brutal terror weapons, but what about just, you know, normal guns that fire bullets? Well, in 40k, recognizable 20th century weapons come in a few different flavors. Almost as ubiquitous as the lasgun is the autogun, a catch-all term for a solid projectile automatic weapon, the equivalent of the sort of weapon modern-day militaries might use, but obviously more advanced in various ways. This is a huge category, ranging from something we might describe as an assault rifle or a submachine gun to heavy vehicle-mounted cannon as an assault rifle or a sub...
Okay, Stub automatic. I thought it was saying like subatomic. I was like, what the fuck, a subatomic pistol? What the hell is that? That sounds advanced, but no, it's just my my brain, you know, misreading things here. Anyway.
Machine gun to heavy vehicle-mounted cannon. The important thing is that it fires some sort of solid ammo. In the Imperium, autoguns are really common, using proven and simple technology, but they're not often used by the military. Lasguns are just way better for logistical purposes since they don't require expendable ammunition. Instead, autoguns tend to be used by militia or gang forces, by revolutionaries and cultists, by less well-supplied planetary defense forces, or just on planets with a lower tech level than would be needed to make las technology. This changes, though, when we get to the heavier weapons. Autocannon come in various sizes and are very common on Imperial vehicles, especially those used by the Astra Militarum and other lower tech forces, where the weight and ammo requirements are way less of an issue. How all these work in-game depends on the game you're playing. In the bigger battlefield games, autoguns and auto pistols are basically identical to lasguns and las pistols. The differences just aren't big enough to be noticeable. But in the smaller scale skirmish games, auto weapons tend to have a higher rate of fire than las weapons at the expense of being a bit less reliable. Autocannons tend to be the...
So I would assume mechanic-wise in-game, they probably have a higher chance of missing, but because they have a higher fire rate, you know, you can shoot at more enemies, units, something like that. I would assume that's how it would work as far as game mechanics go versus lasguns versus autoguns.
Las weapons at the expense of being a bit less reliable. Autocannons tend to be the same across everything, though. Multiple shot heavy weapons that are strong enough to penetrate light vehicle armor, a midway point between the rapid firing heavy bolter and the dedicated anti-tank of the las cannon. On the models, autoguns and autocannon can generally be recognized by their muzzle brake, which usually includes some sort of slot-shaped vents. This is common amongst auto pistols, autoguns, and autocannon, and autoguns always lack that diagonal cutaway that lasguns have. However, as we said, tech levels vary massively across the Imperium, and many older designs of projectile weapons still persist. Stub guns are, by 40k standards, simple handguns of a 19th or 20th century tech level that fire solid bullets. The term stub gun covers everything from a 19th century revolver to a modern automatic, and they're often found amongst gang fighters and local police forces, or as sidearms to less well-supplied defense forces. Their big brother, the heavy stubber, is akin to any number of
Looks
older
like an MG42
machine
almost.
guns, I guess, spraying out a hail of bullets. Unlike the regular stub gun, though, heavy stubbers are common additions to Imperial military vehicles, often as pintle-mounted defense weapons to keep enemy infantry away. In game terms, all of these are just relatively low.
That's like literally an MG42 right there. That very much looks like an old World War II German machine gun.
Strength weapons infantry away. In game terms, all of these are just relatively low strength weapons, usually the lowest strength guns you can get, with the heavy stubber usually able to fire lots and lots of shots. Stub guns are often the cheapest, simplest sort of weapon you can buy in the smaller skirmish games and all but invisible in the big battlefield games. And while we're here, the Imperium also make use of other weapons we might recognize. Shotguns are relatively common, pretty much the same as today's, though Imperial military forces make use of this boxy design of combat shotgun. These are the signature weapons of the Adeptus Arbites, and are also often used by naval armsmen since their low velocity rounds won't pose a danger to a ship's hull. And of course, the Imperium also make use of grenade launchers and missile launchers. There are a dizzying selection of grenades and missiles, depending on what game you're playing, but the most common are frag, a generic name for any explosive fragmentation device that covers a large area, and crack, an implosive or charge that's designed to penetrate armor in a small area. Right, those are all the simpler and more common weapons used by the Imperium, but there are also a lot of more specialist technologies humanity have developed or just kept around over the years. The simplest one of these is flamethrowers, or flamers as they're known in 40k, weapons that spray burning fuel over a large area. In the Imperium, flamer weapons use promethium, a sort of catch-all term for various organically derived refined combustibles, and those are stored compressed in some sort of tank, either a small...
So it's just a fancy term for napalm, essentially. It's 40k napalm. And I mean, flamethrowers have been used for like really since World War I, right? Since we've been able to like really actually utilize, you know, gas technology that way, etc. But yeah. And I mean, against like the Tyranids and things like that, I would think flamethrowers would be highly effective. I don't know how they would be against other more technological enemies, but you know, napalm is napalm, you know what I mean?
Organically derived refined combustibles, and those are stored compressed in some sort of tank, either a small flask attached to the bottom of the weapon or a bulky back-mounted version. Flamers are primarily anti-infantry weapons designed to flush large amounts of enemies out of cover, but within the Imperium, they also have quite an important ritual use. Within the Imperial cult, the idea of burning heretics is pretty popular, so flamers see use all over the place as weapons of cleansing,
purge the heresy with fire,
as actual useful battlefield tools. Unsurprisingly, the Sisters of Battle consider the flamer one of the holy...
Okay, so bolt gun, flamer, and melt-a-gun. That's the holy trinity, huh? Okay, interesting.
Useful battlefield tools. Unsurprisingly, the Sisters of Battle consider the flamer one of the holy trinity of weapons, along with the bolter and the other heat-based weapon, the melt-a-gun. In various games, these weapons are usually low strength but affect quite a wide area, often using a template rather than needing to roll to hit anything. The weapons themselves, again, start small, like the hand flamers used by the Sisters of Battle, and grow to absolutely huge sizes, like the Inferno cannon used on various vehicles, but all of them can be recognized by the vented cowl over the front of the barrel, and usually a little pilot-like thingy at the...
Reminds me of... It probably also does take some reference from the flamethrower in Alien 2. Oh yeah, I mean, there you go. Very much looks kind of like the flamethrowers from Alien. So, anyway, I don't know. An idea that, or just a thought that came up.
The front. Older designs of flamers, though, can look quite different. Flamers from the older games are recognizable by this distinctive nozzle at the front, but all of them always tend to feature a storage tank somewhere around the model. These old flamers can easily be confused with our next sort of weapon, the Grav or Graviton gun. Grav weaponry utilizes the gravitic reaction principle used to power the various anti-grav vehicles used by the
So yeah, these are the guns that I don't really know much about, the gravity guns or anything like that, and I don't think there's gravity guns of any type in Darktide, at least not yet, that I've seen anyway. The only thing I've seen of any kind of gravity gun is it's, I guess, the big ultimate weapon in Bolt Gun was a gravity gun. So I don't really know or have seen much about these type of weapons, so let's see what he has to say about them here.
Be confused with our next sort of weapon, the Grav or Graviton gun. Grav weaponry utilizes the gravitic reaction principle used to power the various anti-grav vehicles used by the Imperium. When fired, they project a stream of particles that affect the local gravitational field near the target area, either increasing or decreasing the gravity. They were originally designed for use in low gravity environments, possibly even as non-lethal weaponry, since they can be used just to slow down a target. But at higher settings, the field generated by grav weapons can crush bones and rupture organs, which
essentially, like, you could, yeah, just hit something with a beam of gravity energy or whatever you want to call it, gravity waves, and they would just be crushed instantly. It would just be like immediately throwing someone, like a human that's used to Earth's gravity, all of a sudden is being thrown, you know, into Jupiter's gravity. That's, you know, what, like 10 plus times, you know, what ours is, something like that. If I remember, you just basically just be crushed instantly. So I mean, that's, and it sounds like it could be turned either way. Like it could be used as either a lethal weapon that way by like upping the setting and powering up the gravity, and so like in a local area they would just be crushed, or turning down the gravity, so they would just kind of sit there and just float kind of helplessly, you know what I mean, and they'd just be stuck in place. So it sounds like it could be used as both a non-lethal or lethal weapon, depending on the setting, I guess. But I mean, this is 40k. Let's be real. Like, everything's lethal. There is no non-lethal.
But at higher settings, the field generated by grav weapons can crush bones and rupture organs, which, as you can probably guess, tends to be how the Imperium use the technology.
Right.
Grav weapons are most effective when deployed against heavily armored infantry or targets like vehicles, where the target's own weight can be used against it. In the 41st millennium, grav weaponry is, like many technologies, barely understood. During the time of the Great Crusade, graviton weapons were relatively common, but in the 41st millennium, grav weapons are relics used by either the Space Marines or repurposed from industrial or mining technology. You don't see them in that many games. Grav weapons can be identified by the nozzle on the front, which, as mentioned, can be pretty confusing, but they also tend to have rows of valves and sci-fi focusing nodes studded down the side of the gun. All right, next up, melter weapons. Melter weapons are also called fusion guns, and they work by initiating a small-scale fusion reaction in a compressed gas.
So it's a gun that creates like a controlled nuclear explosion that you shoot out at something. Interesting. Interesting. That would be quite effective. I mean, he talked about radiation guns earlier, and I'd never really like heard about anything like that, as far as I know. This is a gun that's in Bolt Gun, but I never really understood like what it is. So no wonder it's so powerful.
And they work by initiating a small-scale fusion reaction in a compressed gas that's then projected as a superheated beam that cooks, melts, or vaporizes the target.
Yeah, how would you use that without, like, I mean, I guess it could be a situation where it's just the radiation isn't being projected out. It's just the byproduct of the heat in the explosion, you know, that's being projected out. So it's just the heat that's getting used and not the radiation itself. Because I would think that using something like that, you would need to have, I mean, the Space Marine suits will probably protect them from any kind of radiation damage along with just their genetic manipulation. But a regular dude using one of these, I would think, would be pretty susceptible without some kind of suit on. But then again, if it's not a radiation thing and it's just projecting the heat from the fusion reaction out, then, you know, I guess that's also why it's called a melta. So that might be all that it is.
by initiating a small-scale fusion reaction in a compressed gas that's then projected as a superheated beam that cooks, melts, or vaporizes the target. The gun itself makes no sound when it fires, but the beam often produces a roaring as the air in the beam superheats. Melter technology is very reliable and used all over the Imperium, often as industrial cutting tools, but also as weapons. They're particularly useful against really heavily armored targets like vehicles and buildings, the disadvantage being that they're also quite short-ranged and their effects get a lot more potent the closer you can get. Like everything, they come in a number of sizes, the most common being the melter gun and the heavier multi-melter, but pistol versions do exist. Confusingly, those are called Inferno pistols, and Inferno is also a name we give to bigger flamer weapons. All of these, in pretty much every game, are short-range support weapons. Total overkill against any humanoid-sized fighter, but by far the most useful tool for getting rid of vehicles and cutting through doors. Like everything, they're recognizable by their barrel. Melter barrels are tubular with horizontal vents on them, and the bigger weapons, like multi-melters, just have multiple barrels. They can look a bit like a heavy flamer sometimes, but they lack the nozzle shape or the pilot light. Plasma weapons are an old and pretty unstable design of weapon dating back to the dark age of technology, but they're very popular. They work by converting gas or liquid fuel into an energized packet of matter called plasma, the same material found in reactor cores or in stars, and then propelling that packet forward through magnetic acceleration.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, obviously it's fantasy, you know, sci-fi weaponry, but this is the one gun and bolt gun that I was like, this doesn't feel as strong as it should be. Granted, I play it on Exterminatus, so, you know, it could just be a situation where everything just had that much more health, but it took, like, you know, you don't really, this wasn't really used, I didn't really use this against, like, the basic stuff, but the heavier stuff, it would still take, like, up to 5 hits. To kill something with this. It really felt kind of more like a rocket launcher, like the Doom equivalent rocket launcher or whatever. But I would think, you know, a highly charged bolt of plasma would be able to tear through quite a lot and would be one of the more effective guns in the 40k universe. So I don't know. Let's see what I'd say more about it.
Into an energized packet of matter called plasma, the same material found in reactor cores or in stars.
I can't stop yawning all of a sudden.
Propelling that packet forward through magnetic acceleration. Plasma weapons are
so it's like a plasma railgun.
Pretty common specialist weapon in the Imperium's militaries, despite the fact that they're kind of a lost technology and usually dangerous as a result. They're pretty bulky weapons designed for use against enemy heavy infantry or particularly tough and heavily armored troops. But the downside is that plasma weapons take a long time to recharge, and overuse can lead to overheating, and the cooling process, which usually involves expelling superheated gas, can be pretty horrific for the operator.
I would bet, yeah.
In-game, plasma weapons are really strong specialist weapons that tend to be very good against high-toughness enemies, with the added bonus that they can rapid fire. They often have a choice of power levels you can fire them at, with the obvious danger that at the higher levels, they might overheat and kill your own models, which is, of course, the only level you should choose in every game. Plasma weapons within the Imperium come in all shapes and sizes, from plasma pistols up to plasma cannons, but can all be recognized by the magnetic acceleration coils on the back and by the distinctive oval firing hood dotted with vents for the escaping gases. Plasma weapons have been around for a while, so there are a few different designs. Older plasma weapons tend to have a more of a circular shape, and there are some chaos ones with no protective cowl.
Pretty tight looking.
There are also tainted versions of plasma weapons, usually called warp fire weapons, which used dark and spooky plasma, but they're still pretty recognizable.
Dark and spooky plasma.
We're getting weird now, are an ancient design of weapon manufactured by the fire weapons, which used dark and spooky plasma, but they're still pretty recognizable. Volkite weapons, we're getting weird now, are an ancient design of weapon manufactured by the Mechanicum on Mars. In the days of the Great Crusade, they were briefly one of the standard weapons of the Legiones Astartes before they switched back to the more reliable Terran Bolter. They're a sort of radiation-based thermal weapon, another sort of heat ray that could set the target's flesh alight and whose energies could bounce through closely packed enemies. However, they were a lot more difficult to maintain than the other options, and during the Horus Heresy, They kind of fell out of favor until in the 41st millennium, they're quite rare, only really used by the occasional Space Marine or, much more commonly, by the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus. In-game, Volkite weapons are usually short-ranged guns that fire a lot of shots, but which aren't very good at penetrating armor. They usually have a mechanic that allows those rays to bounce around the target squad like lightning. The more models you kill, the more are then hit by secondary shots.
Okay, so yeah, it sounds like an anti-infantry weapon that has a chain effect, essentially, as far as game mechanics go. That's pretty tight.
Squad like lightning. The more models you kill, the more are then hit by secondary shots. Volkite weapons come in a number of sizes, all of which have crazy old-fashioned gun names, from the pistol-sized Serpenta to the rifle-sized Charger and Caliver, up to huge weapons like the vehicle-mounted Volkite Demi-Culverin or Volkite Kieravil found on the Knight Styrics. They can be recognized by two distinctive features. First, the rows of power coils that are always present on the sides of the weapon, and then this sort of rectangular muzzle or port on the front from where the Martian heat rays are emitted. Getting even stranger, needle weapons are an exotic imperial technology that's rarely seen on the battlefield. Needle weapons fire a tiny sliver of solidified toxin embedded in a...
Sounds like an assassin weapon, is what we're getting at here.
Needle weapons fire a tiny sliver of solidified toxin embedded in a low-power carrier beam of laser energy. The intent is that the laser pierces any clothing or light armor and delivers the toxin straight into the target. They're a delicate and hard-to-manufacture technology, but completely silent, which makes them perfect for stealth troops or assassins.
Yeah.
They're also famously expensive. In the Imperium,
I would bet.
These aren't often military weapons, and needle pistols or needle sniper rifles are much more likely to be carried by wealthy nobles or their agents. Since you don't see them that often in the game, the depiction of needle weapons can vary quite a lot, but most feature a sort of long, thin barrel that puts you in mind of a syringe, which is kind of understandable for a weapon that fires solidified poison. And then finally, right on the weird end of the scale, conversion beam weapons are an ancient and very rare technology. A conversion beam projector fires a high-intensity energy beam that converts matter into pure energy. I feel like I've said some variation of that 10 times already in this video.
So it kind of sounds like a deatomizing technology where it just manipulates matter and, yeah, just erases matter and changes it back to energy. Interesting. That sounds like that would be some, you know, dark age of technology, STC type stuff.
Into pure energy. I feel like I've said some variation of that 10 times already in this video. Anyway, the denser the target is, and the longer the range, the more matter is converted, which makes conversion beam weapons better the further away you are, and very useful against very heavy targets.
So it's like a sniper rifle kind of
they're an ancient and extremely temperamental technology, requiring a high degree of skill and finesse to focus and use. So by the 41st millennium, they're only really found on relic vehicles or in the armory of the odd tech marine. Though technically conversion beam technology comes in different forms, they're almost always extremely heavy weapons. Standard C-beamers are vehicle or dreadnought mounted technology, and variants like the conversion beam cannon or conversion dissilator are Knight and Titan grade weapons. And there are, of course, a million other weapons in the Imperium, often ones that exist only on one specific model, but that's all the main technologies. As you can see, once you know what to look for, they do look pretty distinct. There are really obvious design cues on most of them, so that you and your...
You can tell the difference in what between, you know, a Lasgun, auto gun, bolter, flamer, plasma gun. Like plasma guns especially are always very unique. They always have like the blue coils or whatever, and yeah, this kind of circular-esque, you know, curved front or whatever. And flamethrowers are also always very easy to spot.
Look pretty distinct. There are really obvious design cues on most of them so that you and your opponent can tell the difference from a table away, which is, of course, the point. Now, these aren't the only weapons we could do a video like this for. Melee weapons are also pretty distinct, and each of the non-human factions have even weirder technologies out there, but hopefully you should be able to tell your heat ray from your heat ray from your heat ray. Thanks for watching.
All right. There you go.
And And if you'd like to find out more about the weird equipment of the 41st millennium, there should be a video just popping up there to the right, or you can like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel, there's a link to the Patreon in the thing below, where you can join in with our Town of 4 Gamers build along and get early access to some of the videos. See ya!
All right, there you go. Another great video by Arbitor Ian going over the Warhammer guns, basically all the Imperium guns and the main types of Imperium weapons. Going over bolters, flamers, lasguns, auto guns, gravity weapons, melt-a-guns. Most of the basic stuff I already kind of really knew about and how they really functioned. It was interesting, you know, how the bolt guns are basically rocket-propelled bullets. It's basically RPGs made into a machine gun is what it sounds like. And the different kinds of rounds that can be used. They're more expensive and often more prone to jamming and heavy. Kind of really seems like they're mainly used by Astartes, and they have kind of a status behind them. So they are kind of a prestige type of weapon. Lasguns are the very, you know, common weapon. They're very easy to mass produce. You don't really have to create ammo for it. They have rechargeable battery cells that seem like they might be universal. So any kind of power pack can be put into any pistol, rifle, you know, las machine gun, whatever, and it just works. And the amount of power you're able to put through the lasgun seems to indicate the amount of power that the weapon can essentially have. And there's various types, you know, sniper rifles, pistols, etc., etc. Auto guns, they're just basically like the standard guns that we have nowadays. The gravity weapons were the ones that, like I said during the video, I really didn't know much about, and as I may have mentioned in the video, it sounds like they could be used as lethal or non-lethal weapons. But obviously in the 40k universe, you know, everything's lethal. So, but I wonder, you know, and again, because I want to know more about, you know, the dark age of technology and the peak of technology, where, you know, that branch of technology, how far it went, you know, how far humanity took it and the scale that it went to. Because it sounds like, you know, you could take that kind of technology, put it on, you know, a battleship of some sort, and just be able to shoot beams of, you know, massive gravity energy, gravity waves or whatever at other ships and just crush other ships, you know, before they can really even do anything, or open singularities and black holes and do all kinds of crazy stuff. So I would be interested to learn more about that kind of technology and how far it went. Melt-a-guns sound interesting. It sounds like they would be highly dangerous when not used by potentially like a space marine, just because you're creating a controlled fusion reaction and you're projecting, I guess, the heat of that fusion out and like a cone in front of you. It sounds like a fusion shotgun, basically. It sounds like a flame shotgun, but it's the temperature is like so great that it's able to just melt anything in a short range in front of it. Flamethrowers are flamethrowers. Everyone knows, you know, how flamethrowers work. And yeah, that pretty much kind of covers most of everything that we went over. Plasma guns, the matter converter, energy to matter converter weapon they talked about. Sounds again like something very much dark age of technology, and would love to hear more about where that, you know, how far that chain of technology could go, where they would take that, and stuff like that. I would love to have them get to more books on just like an off branch, I guess, of Warhammer 40k during that dark age of technology time. I would just love to learn more about humanity during that time and everything that humanity did, and just to see where humanity was at the peak of its civilization and technology. So, but anyway, great video by Arbitor Ian. I will have the link to this video and to his channel down below in the description. You should absolutely go check out his stuff and give him a follow and all that if you like his content. Appreciate you guys watching this video and hanging out with me. If you're still watching this video at the end, thank you very much. It means a lot. If you like this video, consider leaving a like and a sub. If you want to become a YouTube member, click the join button down below and check out the various tiers and see which one would fit you best. And join up if you would like to for some exclusive videos and discussions and stuff like that, and more coming down the line as I'm able to do it. So thank you guys very much. Hope you have yourself a wonderful day, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.